So I'm going to try my best to keep tabs of Twitch as well as questions in the thing in Zoom. Um, so one thing that I've really want this to be is as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, the only stupid question is not asking the question. There are no stupid questions. So please feel free to stop me, interrupt me, whatever you want to call it. And sorry, I'm just going to put everyone on mute. Other than Mike. Yeah, feel free to stop me, interrupt me. This is just going to be a very basic introduction. Cross-site scripting, as you probably will see in a bit, can get really, really complicated. If I can enter my right password, especially when you start looking at the likes of filtering and that and ways of bypassing that. Oh, come on. Okay, so what I'm going to show for this is, for those who aren't familiar, this is just Kali. So Kali is a pen testing image that you can download off the network. Just search Kali, download, and you'll see an ISO, spin it up in a VM such as VirtualBox or VMware Player. So all the tools I'm using here are out of the box provided with Kali. So Firefox, nothing special about that. And Burp Suite. So this is the community edition of Burp Suite. Alright, so what I am going to use for this purpose is WebGoat. So this is a OWASP tool, purposely weak. It's got a few vulnerabilities in it, and we'll go through this. If it loads, what's it doing? Come on. Well, I always do that in but always make sure you don't have the intercept on. The amount of time just like, why is this not working? You gotta have the intercept on. So let that load. Alright, cross-site scripting. So there is a cross-site scripting vulnerability in here. Before I go into cross-site scripting, I think it's important to try explain what it is. So when you go to a website, you load something called HTML. Hypertext markup language. I'm bad with acronyms, so apologies if I get that wrong. But basically it's like a tree structure, and within that it defines how the document is rendered and loaded. You have different tags such as your header tag, your input field tags, and so on and so forth. Now, cross-site scripting in its root form, most basic form, is the ability to modify that structure. It's a form of injection attack, so you can inject content into the HTML object of the HTML hierarchy, or whatever you want to define it as, and modify how that document's either displayed, rendered, behavior of it, so on and so forth. It all depends on where you inject that. There's three different, there's actually more than three types, but the two biggest or most common ones that you'll find is stored cross-site scripting and reflected cross-site scripting. We'll go over, probably just going to cover these mainly today, mainly these two. So stored cross-site scripting, think of it like a user form is a good example, where I can inject my payload with a cross-site script, it gets saved somewhere, and then results in it being rendered for whoever accesses that page. Reflected cross-site scripting, on the other hand, is something that's, as the name suggests, reflected. So it's input in one portion, and then it is and then it is reflected or rendered back to that user. That one is probably, if you ask me in terms of dangerous, how dangerous it is, reflected is generally a little bit less because it's typically the same user. So you got to often leverage things like phishing or social engineering to get them to click on something like a link or something. Where stored, you have a wider net generally. So think about like a forum. You can, or the users on the forum or admins or whatever. And it's also persisted. It's saved, so you don't have to get someone to click on a link in a sequence or something like that. So it's yeah. Yeah, and that, as I mentioned, there's also DOM. DOM, I still battle to get my head around it exactly, but kind of think of you using JavaScript to render the page and modify the actual DOM, as the name suggests. So DOM is also could be stored or reflected. It just depends how it's rendered and stored. The other one is that I didn't even know that existed till a while ago, was blind cross-site scripting. And that one is especially interesting because most of these attacks, you'll inject something in, view a result somewhere, and then you can actually see your result render and work. Well, blind cross-site scripting means you inject it somewhere and you actually don't see the result. This could be a cross-site scripting vulnerability on an entirely different system to where you injected that payload, or a different page which you don't have access to, or so on and so forth. So the way that's done, I might, if we've got time, might just cover it on the end. So before I begin, are there any questions? Mark, you want to add anything more to that? Okay, so what I'm going to do, unless there's no other questions or any questions, yes, yeah, it is. I hope it is. It should be. Twitch is recording it if Twitch is streaming it properly. All right, so just very high level, this is HTML. So this is the source of the page. You have different fields. So HTML generally starts, or should always start with the HTML tag. Actually, more specifically later, the latest one's doctype. But HTML tag, you have a header, which defines like things in your top, as well as generally where scripts and style sheets are loaded. Some might argue that should be at the bottom of the page so it can render the page faster. That's a whole web design debate, not a security debate. And then you have the body. So within the body, this is the actual content of the page. You have different things like your headers, divs, frames, different input fields, links, so on and so forth. So the one that we're going to be interested in is this here, a simple search box. So you enter in something, some text that you want to search for, and off it will go and search. So let's just enter in test. All right, and there we go. Now, the one thing that should, generally when you're trying to look for cross-site scripting, is you're trying to look for an input and the corresponding output and see if they're going to be the same. So for example, yeah, we put in test, and then the output, it displayed like identically to what we put in. And if we go view at the HTML, you can actually see it was, oof, this is terrible. Should go in there, but the results for tests. So let's put in some special characters and see how it reacts to that. Because one of the things with cross-site scripting is you can filter out characters, and that's generally what you would do for cross-site scripting. But again, we can see that it doesn't appear to be doing anything to the characters. Now, one character that you want to test, especially, are the angle brackets, because this is what HTML is built up out of. So if we put in one angle bracket, it's displayed it. Now, be careful. This has bitten me many times. When viewing this in the page, make sure it's not HTML encoded, and you'll see why this is important at a later stage. When it displays on the page, it's going to display as HTML. Oh, I'm just meeting people. When it displays on the page, it's going to display like the actual character, but it's actually not the actual character. It's HTML encoding of that character. So in this case here, inspect this. We want to make sure that it is the actual character, which it is. And the way you can do that is on the tag, edit as HTML, and you actually can see the raw HTML value for it. Just not working there. I don't know why you can't view that as HTML, but again, we can view it in Burp Suite. It's probably going to be the better option. Let's see. This is probably rendering it. It's all dynamic. Oh, damn it. The principle remains. You got to view it as HTML. So try to view the real source to make sure it's not being HTML encoded. Now let's test if this is cross-site scripting, vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So when you see cross-site scripting, you'll almost always hear the term script alert script, and that is putting in a script tag with the alert JavaScript function, call it alert one, and then ending that script tag. All right, so if we run this now, we suddenly get an alert pop-up. So what does that mean? That means that the JavaScript function alert triggered, and we pass in one as a output to that. So that's why there's a one displayed. And probably multiple places on the page where that's rendered. Now let's go view this. And you'll also see that that script alert script is no longer displaying here. So why is that? Let's view the page source. Let's view it and see what's going on. So what you see here is the initial bit of a search, but then you also see the script alert script. So this is now actually forming HTML, which is then actually rendering as part of the page itself, the HTML of the page. So your browser is literally taking this tag as a script tag, executing that alert function, and that's why we see that pop-up, that alert pop-up. So this is a case of where you have user input that you're not filtering or controlling, you're allowing anything to be put in, and someone could then start injecting other HTML tags even. So I know it's cross-site scripting, which forms the notion of like JavaScript and that, but it's not just specific to cross-site JavaScript. So I could also put in something like a new header, and there we go. You see that's displaying it as a new header. So you can also modify the actual content of the page by injecting scripts. Another one, probably that's a very benign one, but I always could. Yeah, they could certainly do that, or they could do something like this. Sorry, this is the one. I always forget the tags and what the fields are. That's why I always got to look them up. So, for example, href equals. Yeah, indeed. Please click me. And then what this should result in, if I've done it right, there we go, there's a link. And if I click on it, it will go to Google. Now, obviously, this is a very benign example, but if this could be like, please click here to log in and take you to a spoofed phishing, or a spoofed login site where the attacker controls that server, and then they could harvest the user's credentials, some sign up or whatever. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be up to the attacker how far they want to go, and up to their own imagination. The attacker has the ability to modify basically the entire page. One other thing you can do, and this is probably where it starts getting a bit more dangerous, is a redirect. So I gotta figure this out. Sorry, I should have had this ready. Mark, you wanted to say anything? Yeah, exactly. I don't have an example here off the cuff of my head. But wait, maybe this will work. This might work. Come on. Yeah, exactly. So here's the thing. With cross-site scripting, what you have is remote code execution on the client. That's what it really is. That's what it essentially boils down to. Now, in many cases, it's highly restricted as to what you can do. But like in this scenario, in this example, yeah, it's pretty much open. Any HTML that you can throw at it, it will happily render, and away you go. So that's where I said often it's limited to attacker's imagination, and they can start leveraging this to do really bad things. And I'll show in a bit one thing and one tool they can use and have great fun with, and really kind of worrying. And all it just takes is a single injection of cross-site script like this. So there we go. So let me do that again. hopefully it'll allow me to go back and I don't have to retype everything. Ah. Okay. No. Okay. Think. Okay. So what this is, again, this is cross-site scripting. As I said, script. This is telling it's JavaScript, and what it's doing is changing the Windows location. This window.location.href. So it's literally saying to the browser, change this Windows location to become google.com. So when it renders that, guess what? It goes to google.com. So an attacker could leverage that to do like a phishing of the page if the user's not paying attention. Imagine this is a cross-site scripting vulnerability on the login. Hey, presto, you suddenly got a spoofed login page where the user hit it initially and thought everything was fine. Or you could redirect to a site where it downloads malicious payloads. I think this has been done before. I'm not too aware of the actual full limitations of JavaScript and what you can and can't do in terms of downloads and malware, but I have seen mention of it before. All right. So before I move any further forward, any other questions? Yeah, so there's one from Oversoft. So you can catch button clicks and submits. It depends on what you can inject with JavaScript, but if it can be done with JavaScript, guess what? You can do it with a cross-site script. Yep. There's I can show an example. So you can do it with on hover like this. I'm trying to think of an example here. On hover equals alert. This should, if I'm right, do that alert pop up. I think. Let's see. Maybe not. I gotta get my on hover or what's that? This tag might not even have it. That's maybe why. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's mouse over. Something like that. That tag might not have it. On mouse over. There we go. Thank you, Thomas. If I get this right. This is why. There we go. So as you can see, you let go over that and it executes. So another thing, if someone asks, can you use cross-site scripting to steal session cookies? Definitely. So this is where, and this is, so if you look at cookies, there's 3 flags. There's the secure flag, and that specifies that cookie will always be sent over HTTPS. There's a new one called same site. That's used to try break code, or tackle cross-site request forgery. And then the other is HTTP only. Now, HTTP only stipulates to the browser that this cookie can only be sent with HTTP requests. What that basically boils down to, JavaScript cannot interact with that cookie. That's all fine and dandy with the old web, kind of pre-HTML5. What we're having with HTML5 is cookies are going away, like session cookies, and they've been replaced by session tokens, which are kind of stateless in terms of servers, because they've been, I think one greater argument is so you can have client-side session versus server-side session. So things like dynamically spin up servers and all of that's a lot easier, which makes sense. But those cookies are being set in things like local storage and that, and those don't have the same protections. You're literally using JavaScript to set the cookie in the session storage and retrieve it from the session storage. So, or sorry, not the cookie, the session token, because it's not even a cookie anymore. It comes through as a header, usually an authorization bearer header. So JWT is a good example of a session cookie used by many apps. Now, that's all rendered with or consumed and interacts with JavaScript. So any JavaScript on your site would be able to have access to that token and be able to modify it and all of that kind of thing. So yes, session stealing with cross-site scripting kind of went away, but yeah, I see it probably becoming more of a risk these days with the later web technologies. All right, so everyone happy with that introduction? Everyone comfortable with what cross-site scripting actually is? Don't all shout at once. All right, okay, I assume you are. So let's try move on and try do more. All right, so as I mentioned, you get reflected cross-site scripting. So this here was an example of a reflected cross-site scripting. I put in my cross-site script, and it rendered on the next output. So it just happened to be on the same page. Might even rendered in a different page. Who knows these days with the way different pages are dynamically loaded. That's not important. What it is for my action, I put it in, it rendered in the next section, portion, and then if I went back to it, it disappeared. So it's not been persisted or stored anywhere. It's reflected. So it put it in, reflect back. Now stored, on the other hand, is a lot more dangerous because by its very nature, as the name suggests, it's stored. So it can last a lot longer, perhaps indefinitely. So let's try this scenario out. So I've not done this, so let's try to do this together. So there's Tom. We want to verify that Jerry is affected by the attack. So what we want to do as Tom is store a cross-site scripting. Go away. So we need to go into Tom's profile here, view his profile, you can see a street, and let's go in here. And which so we want to do it against the street field. So let's put in a nice script. Alert one script and update the profile. So there we go. Oh, this is going to be, oh, I don't want to do that just in case, get more. So if we inspect this element again, let's inspect it. And there we go. We can see our script alert script. And this is where I was talking about, you want to add it as HTML, because I've had this bite me. I'm like, hey, there's a cross-site scripting. Why is it not rendering? I mean, everything's there. I don't know why Chrome and that don't actually render the raw characters. So if you HTML encode, I'll go into HTML encoding shortly. Why they don't actually display it when you're viewing the source is annoying. You actually have to go in, edit as HTML, and then you'll see the HTML encoding. So this is really pain when you're trying to do a proof of concept or something, and you see it there, and it's like, it's there, should be firing off, and it's not. Turns out it's HTML encoded. Okay, so I don't understand how this is supposed to work. So stuff, I think I got to now log out. Oh, let's find Jerry. I don't know. This this thing does really make sense to me, but we'll try. Oh, there we go. So remember, I edited that field as Tom, and now if I'm Jerry and I go view Tom's profile, I now have that cross-site scripting executing. So a scenario where this could be a issue and a kind of use case is I'm an ordinary user, maybe on an admin forum, a forum of some sorts, and there's an admin on the site that I really want to target and get his account or something. So I'll do a post or something, and then he'll go visit it, and guess what? His browser will now execute the cross-site scripting, and I could steal things like session cookies or tokens, and then have access as that admin. There are also one of the other things. I don't want to go too far into cross-site request forgery, but with cross-site scripting, you can very much do that. You can start doing things on behalf of the user, like submitting requests. So as an admin, you can suddenly start creating users as that admin, because everything is done in context of the user's browser and their current session. So the limitations are what you can fit in the cross-site scripting payload and what that user currently has access to. So hopefully everyone can see. Wow, my browser's frozen. No, my VM's frozen. Hopefully everyone can see the idea behind stored, or sometimes referred to as persistent cross-site scripting. Let me see if I can get my VM back up. Oh, it's back. Yay. So, and we've got a nice green check. All right. Yep. Yeah. So you're now getting into the realms of CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. So historically, that used to be called same-site policy, and the browser would prevent. It starts getting really complicated very quickly, but basically the very high-level basic things, and don't quote me on this. I might be getting a few things wrong. Was basically a site could make a request, but it couldn't render the response. And now with CORS, a site will make a request for basic requests. So things like, I think, posts and get with the different content types, basically application text and form. It's online. You'll need to check. If it can do that, then it can submit the request, but I don't think it can pass the response. But then there is something called, as I mentioned, cross-origin resource sharing. That's the basic request. You can allow those requests to happen via headers in the sites, like the different origin headers. So what the browser does is something called a pre-flight check, saying, hey, I'm going to make this request. The browser goes off to the server, like, am I allowed to make this request? Yes. And it does that dance. That's called the pre-flight check. And that can allow those things to happen, which is why in CORS headers, putting star is very, very, very bad, because you're allowing any site to interact with your site via XML, HTTP, or XHR, and make requests as well as render the response. So yeah, it gets complicated very quickly. So I won't go too much depth, but it is possible. All right. So, um, so we're going to implement a fix to block the store cross-site scripting. David is not. So let's go see. David is not affected by the vulnerability. Does that mean we just got to log in as David? Oh, we're gonna log in as Eric. Okay, let's log in as Eric. Sorry, I did say this was going to be very informal, so that's my excuse. Let's put script alert, script alert, and there will be more exciting things later. Script and update him. Okay, so Eric is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Let's log out. Let's go to David. Let's view his profile. Okay. Oh, this only works with that. I don't have that. I should have read that. Sorry. That would be why. You get it. I wonder. So I'm doing this. Just trying to see. Let's see if we can implement some rudimentary. Okay. I'm gonna log in as David. I'm gonna see if I'm gonna do man in the middle to basically mimic what should be done. We're gonna view as Eric. No. Bruce view profile. Okay, so Bruce has cross-site scripting. So let's do this. Let's intercept that. Let's view Bruce's profile, and what I want to do, is to intercept response. So what I'm going to do in this is I'm going to find this alert. It should be on the street somewhere. There we go. Now I want to put in. So this is where you start coming to measures that you can use to prevent cross-site scripting. With security, it always used to be filter or validate your inputs, validate your outputs. Mark, feel free to chime in, or anyone else. I'm kind of erring on the input validation. You should do it where you can, but relying on it as a security measure these days is not sufficient. The problem is there's systems now with so many inputs that trying to validate every single input may not always be possible. So personally, I rather shift my focus to outputs, especially output encoding. You have a lot more benefits or effectiveness in doing that. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do input validation. You should certainly do it where you can, but realize that it's not always going to be possible, and it's going to get more and more difficult as you have more and more systems interacting with one another. Cool. So what I'm doing here is now what's called HTML encoding. And thanks Oversoft, I agree. Add less than and greater than are much easier on the eyes. As I said, I use references all the time. So that's why I look up these things. And often get it wrong. So what you effectively doing is telling the browser, hey, this is still less than, this is still greater than, but only for display purposes. Don't treat it as part of the DOM, the document object module, the actual page, the HTML. So when this goes forward, if this is done it correctly, there we go. Yay, it worked. So as you can see, I didn't get that pop-up. It didn't load. It didn't show the alert. And that's because this is now not actually HTML. It's text. The HTML tags are what's called HTML encoded. And that tells the browser, don't render it, just display it. So if you inspect this element, and you'll see now the point that I was trying to make earlier, where you see it and it's like, hey, this should render. Why is this not executing? But you got to actually go and edit as HTML to see it do it. I don't know why browsers do that. I really wish they would just render it when you're viewing the source, because I mean, that's the whole point of viewing the source. But anyway, just might grow up. So there it is there. So for me, HTML encoding is probably the most effective way you're going to block cross-site scripting. Certainly like stored and reflected. You may find caveats around this. I'm not aware of anything. I've tried and tried and tried. It doesn't mean that there isn't. But I've personally tried so many ways before to try get around HTML encoding, and I haven't had much success. And this is where you really start getting into the realms of cross-site scripting, bypassing like WAF filters, trying to figure out ways to break the HTML encoding, so on and so forth. Like HTML encoding, I think I have actually. I might have got around HTML encoding, but that's because of like double encoding and all that kind of thing. Yeah, it gets. Yep, definitely. All right, so, yep, sure. So that goes to the point of like kind of input validation, output validation, or input encoding, output encoding. It's very much going to depend on your system. I know some systems that just have so many inputs, and guess what? Some of those inputs are purposely malicious, and you still want it to be the raw input. Like think of many security systems. You really want the raw, unencoded format, because when you're investigating it, that's what you need to look at. Like, hey, why did this alert trigger or whatever? So in cases like that, you certainly would not want to encode it. But when displaying it to the users, you certainly would want to encode it. Certainly on the security system, because there could be malicious links to that it's rendered users' browsers. So it's going to very much depend on your system, how comfortable you are. My personal view is I'd rather focus as close to the user as possible. That way I know like whatever's being displayed to the user should be safe. Because cross-site scripting is only really going to be an issue when you're rendering in a browser. Things like API calls and that, there are a whole bunch of other things associated with that, like XC, which is cross XML, basically like cross-site scripting for XML. But that's a whole different side topic. You can't do cross-site scripting in like a API to a service somewhere. That's the point I'm trying to make. Cross-site scripting is going to be very much in a browser for now, and browser / mobile app, because some mobile apps are very much just browsers. So another question: would it be preferable to do the server side or client side? Very good question. Server side, always server side. So, I mean, you just saw an example of me tampering with a response from the server. I actually did it the opposite way an attacker would probably do. Make the request safer instead of more dangerous. So if you do it client side, it still can be tampered with. So, I mean, it's probably more far-fetched, but remember, you probably then have to rely on things like JavaScript itself. Who knows, the JavaScript could maybe even modify the JavaScript that's doing the sanitization. There could be malware that removes it. It's just, generally when you're doing security things, you always want to try to do them on the server side. Yep, exactly. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much in the reflected because we've done that. What I want to do is, I'm just aware of time, so we'll start doing a bit more fun stuff. Alright, so let me get this set up and running. Let me just get it on my browser here. So this tool is absolutely amazing. I think if we can get the right password. This is Beef, also known as the Browser Exploitation Framework project. Now, with this has JavaScript that renders in the user's browser that can do many bad things. And I will show you. So what needs to happen is, or a client needs to do, is have a JavaScript hook. And when you run Beef, it gives you a hook URL. So it should just be a matter of calling this JavaScript with this Beef hook, and away you go. Sorry, let me just, so what we might do is Beef script. It used to provide you the full script tag, just make it easier. Apologies, as I said, remember, just going to find an example of a script. Okay, script type equals text JavaScript source equals Beef Unfortunately, I'm running VMware on my VMware player that doesn't support copy and paste. So apologies. And that should be it. What I'm going to do is open up the console and make sure it actually executes. How's it doing this? This is kind of Wait, did I put HTTP? I did too. So mixed content. So mixed content means now browsers won't render HTTP and HTTPS. There we go, that's better. And if everything is working as it should, I should be, yep. So that's making constant polls to my B server. And what we should see here is my client is now hooked. And this is where the fun starts. So already off the bat, like just that single JavaScript cross-site scripting, I've got all of this information. I can see the OS, the browser, even things down to like GPUs and memory and resolution and all of this lovely stuff. The real fun is in the commands. So this is where you can start doing the kind of command and control in the user's browser. I'm trying to think how best I can do this. See if I do it on the side like this. Some of them are like clippy, right? The better ones out there, I think Flash Update might even work. There we go. Didn't work. So some of these are a bit iffy, and I'm doing it in a VM, which may not work too well. That probably didn't work well. Let me try this again. Yeah, apologies for that. What it's supposed to do is show the flash thing. I've probably got the I got the images in that wrong, and now it's not rendering. Come on. So let's try this again. Nope. Sorry, I keep on forgetting I don't have copy and paste. So while I am waiting for everyone, just make sure that's right. Copy that now. Okay, so hopefully I am back hooked. All right, I'm just going to do this clippy because this one actually works. I probably didn't have the right images in that. So if we execute this now and come back here, so you can kind of see it there. Sorry, I don't know what's up with this bar there, but you can see it there. Hey, your browser appears to be out of date. Do you want to upgrade it? And that's where you would specify your malware payload or your backdoor or whatever, that exe, and they'll go yes, click run, install. And there's actually just a whole bunch of things you can do. I don't know if this one works, but there's a bunch you got to play around with. Google phishing, so you can actually go to a fake Google page. Hey, can even detect burp. Will that first work? Did that execute? What did that do? Did that do anything? No. Okay. Well, the point is, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. You can play around. There, that's burp false. Okay, that didn't work that well. it literally is using burp. You can use things like detect LastPass. That's installed. Use all these things. But the other cool things are you can do link rewrites, frames, redirect browser. So I'll go this now. And then the background, you see it's going off, should be going off to Beef project, which it's not doing. I don't know why. It was going there. Anyway, it is a bit iffy at times, especially when you don't have it set up properly. Oh, yeah, it did. Sorry. Yeah, multiple tabs. Got myself mixed. But yeah, you can see it's redirected to Beef. And they are kind of, so one of the problems is you need to persist this, because as soon as you refresh the page, the cross-site script's gone, so it might not render. There does have some things with mixed results for persisting. The other thing is with cross-site scripting is if you're doing caching, this is where it can also be really powerful for an attacker. If they're doing caching, especially imagine things like proxies. Now every user that's going to hit that proxy is probably might be serving up that same cache page. Well, guess what? You have a whole bunch of users now suddenly connected on Beef, and you can do bad things. Now, the one other thing I wanted to show quickly before we call it is two more things, actually. One is this. So it's all very well showing you WebGoat and, hey, here's what potentially could happen. But I thought it'd be important to show, like, here's a real world application that people and companies use, and here's a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So in this, there's this Niffy project. This is the Apache project, and there was a cross-site script vulnerability in this. Now, I want to see if I can do this. So I'm going to start it up here. And I'm just going to show it via curl. It's probably going to just be the easiest because it might just take too long otherwise. While I am doing that, let me show you another one that was found a while ago. Okay, so here's here. Oh, someone got a question? Oh. Okay. Sorry, just put on mute. Alright, so this was a vulnerability found some time ago, 2014, with a security product, Carbon Black. Kudos to them, they actually fixed it. This is just now an example of a DOM-based cross-site scripting vulnerability, also stored. And you'll see in the rendering why it's a DOM. So what this was here was a post to create a user. And in this post, the cross-site scripting vulnerability is actually this. Now, actually, you see that this is also where you asked David, should you include HTML encoding in the stored? Well, this HTML coding actually resulted in this cross-site scripting vulnerability being exploitable, just because of the way the system handles it. It meant that this was essentially not part of the JSON. I can't remember, but it was a while ago. And here was the result. So to the user, everything looked fine and dandy. I mean, there's no alert boxes or anything, but when you actually view the source of it, see if I can get this a bit better. There's a source of that, and as you can see, on click goes to a different location. This is obviously dangerous because you click on that, you can then forward them onto a spoof page, or again, malware. We've seen it. Or you could use, instead of on-click on mouse over, as I showed you earlier, do a beef hook. Suddenly you got an admin who has a connected browser to a beef server. Now this is dumb because it's not actually injecting like another script or anything. It's actually modifying the document object itself. I could be wrong. I still haven't quite got my head around DOM, but to me this is more a DOM-based cross-site scripting vulnerability because it's actually modifying the DOM itself. If I'm wrong, please correct me. So hopefully this is up, I think, and let's try do this. Cool. No. I did it yesterday. Let me get this. Sorry, I thought I had it there from yesterday. Doesn't matter. I'll do it this way. Now, this is going to be a much harder attack to pull off because you have to modify a actual header, and that's not always that easy. So you might need a cross-site scripting vulnerability in itself to do that as well. And it's not a very easy thing to do. But nonetheless, there's still a cross-site scripting vulnerability in this. Goes. So there we go. Now, as you can see, that's just like littered with the cross-site scripting, which is over there. So if this was rendered in the browser, it would just be popping up alert box all over the place. I'm trying not to go too in depth on this. It's basically same as that input field, just in a header, which then the JavaScript takes and renders. Yeah, so I think that's it. I mean, covered about an hour. Are there any questions on that? I mean, this is very light on cross-site scripting. There's a whole bunch, as I mentioned, on especially bypassing WAFs and filters and that. Mark, you're back. Sweet. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. Yeah. As I say, it's RCE on a client. What that just screams, oh my gosh, to me. One thing I'm surprised both of us should be ashamed we've not mentioned once. So one of the mitigating features that a browser you can utilize to do this, it's a pain in the ass, but it will save you, is content security policy. Uh, the way I like to think of that is like kind of like a firewall for the browser. It defines what resources in a page can load, and you can go, like obviously depending on your CSP policy, you could even go all the way down to preventing cross-site scripting in your page. It all depends on how nailed down that policy you have. Now, I'm not going to go into details of how you do a CSP in that, but as I said, it defines what resources can load. You have things like where those resources can load from, so like which hosts, even to being able to associate announce with a bunch of cross-site scripting, or not, sorry, announce associated with scripts, JavaScripts, not cross-site scripting. So if there is someone trying to modify or inject things, it won't render that JavaScript. So like the script alert script wouldn't render because you tell the browser only script with this nonce can render, or hashes. So you can hash the JavaScript and say, okay, this is an okay JavaScript set of JavaScript, and if anyone modifies that, which JavaScript would, cross-site scripting would, then it would then result in a different hash, and the browser wouldn't execute that JavaScript. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Pain in the ass to get working. Oh my gosh, but it will save you. Like one of the mage cards that no, it wasn't mage card. One of the things that hit browser loud was a whole government sites, was a crypto mining. Um, yeah, and if they use CSP, guess what? CSP is not only just prevents it, it can also act as like a warning because it will do reporting. So if something executes that shouldn't be, guess what? There's a report that could fire off a trigger and an alarm. So it not only will it prevent it, it will also then alert you to it. So that's all I had. If you have any question, so one more thing, I will, from a development point of view, I have seen a massive shift, and a lot of the frameworks and that are doing a great job in preventing things like cross-site scripting. A lot of them just HTML encodes things like everywhere, which is awesome because trying to bypass that, as I mentioned earlier, I've not really had much luck in doing that. When you're talking HTML encoding, the output that's rendered directly to the user, very, very, very hard. I'm not saying it isn't possible. I'm just saying it's very, very hard. I personally haven't. There are people who specialize in cross-site scripting. That's all they basically do. They're absolute geniuses on it, way more clever than I am. And yeah, they still also vouch. I think, I hope I'm right to say they vouch for HTML encoding. Huh. So that's interesting. So sorry, Mike, I just eventually figured out. Well, so at the beginning of this call, I tried to find a Twitter profile for a guy or girl. I think they're a girl, but doesn't really matter. They were or are absolute geniuses on cross-site scripting, but their Twitter account no longer exists. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, but yeah, brute logic is the person. They might have other. So thanks Oversoft. He tried something on his own profile. That person is the absolute genius when it comes to cross-site scripting. They know so many things. They've done books and that on it. So if you're really interested in that stuff, that's the person to talk to and follow and get their book in that, because I know they helped me in one thing as well. So they're absolutely amazing. Yep. Yes. Blind. This couple of years ago, I was like, "What's blind XSS? That's not true." It's like, "Oh, okay." Yes. Yeah, exactly. And what? Here's the link. I got a link on blind XSS that I blogged about. I'll put in there. Oh, not in there. Everyone. There. So when with results from scanners and that, one thing that I look for is that reflected portion. Like it will put something in. That input I may have put in. I've seen this before, though lately I think tools have gotten a lot better. But certainly a few years ago, I saw some things being put in, and the result rendered like almost identical. So to me, that was a flag where I needed to go and look further. And I often just put it as informational, so you can investigate further. Because sometimes a lot of these cross-site scripting vulnerabilities do need tweaks. You do need to change a few characters and add a few characters. There was one on Apache Spark, which I think they fixed, which is I didn't get a CVE, but I spent ages on trying to get that to work because I saw the input kind of got displayed in the output, but not quite. So it took a bit of tweaking to eventually get it to firstly execute and then not break everything on the page, so it didn't become obvious to the user. So sometimes these things do take a bit of work. Yep. The amount of times I try to get my beef hook to trigger on myself without alerting anything or going through antivirus and that. And obviously, again, emphasizing don't go into sites that you do not have permission to do these things. You'll probably end up with a knock on the door. So practice. There are many labs out there. So WebGoat's a good one. In fact, Portswigger, who do Portswigger, who do Burp Suite, they have entire labs on XSS. So I really encourage you to go look at that. They got some excellent stuff. There's CTS, so things like Hack the Box that have some cross-site scripting challenges. HackerOne, they have a kind of CTF type thing as well. They got some challenges there, I think. And then also look to things like DAM, vulnerable VMs, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things you can play. And then you can hack companies, well, not hack, but do this on companies, bug bounties. So make sure you read the limitations that they put in place. Stick to those limitations. Some people made some good money out of finding things like cross-site scripting through bug bounties. So that's another way you can do it. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's exciting when you find these things. Yeah, I mean, I think my cross-site scripting reports and that have actually gone well. So don't let it discourage you. Just keep at it. Some of my other reports are maybe not. So, and as we did mention, like I still don't get how it scores so low on CVSS. Often it scores very, very low, and to me that's a concern. To me, it should get a lot more attention because of what you can achieve with it. But it is injection though. You're literally injecting code. It's injection. It's RCE. It's all of that stuff. So, and I think I don't know how this would even correlate to server side. So a lot of server side stuff now is going towards things like JavaScript. So there's a possibility of DOM-based cross-site scripting on servers now. Maybe I need to look into it, but it might be a possibility. So, but yeah, well, thank you for everyone attending. Hopefully that was useful. As usual, my DMs are open, so if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a shout. Mark, you okay with people giving you a shout? Yeah, just please feel free to give a shout. I will be making this recording available, so I'll post those details or tweet it out once I have that available. But thank you everyone for attending. Hope you all have a awesome evening, and catch you guys later. Thanks. Bye. Cheers. Bye.